Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
Good evening, everyone. I believe you have just finished your meditation. So for those of you who would care to, I'm going to invite you to join me in establishing our refuge and cultivating bodhicitta. Taking just a moment to bring the Buddha to mind in the space in front of us. And let's begin. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha, through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom may attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha, through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom may attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha, through the positive potential I create by practicing generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom may attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. Well, good evening, everyone. I had hoped to be live and in person at our center. However, weather and a few other factors have gotten in the way of that. So I am recording our teaching from a hotel room in Colorado Springs this morning. I did want to make sure that we didn't miss a session. So thank you so much for joining from wherever you are, whether you're at the center or somewhere else online. We have now reached the section of the text where we're going to cover some of the origins of Buddhism, give a good context of the Buddhist teachings, and try to clarify some of the different lineages and often some of the confusion that comes around Buddhism. You can get pretty lost in the different types of teachings and lineages and cultural overlay. And so this portion of the text, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Tuten Chodron are trying to unpack that in a pretty clear way. I'm going to do my best to just really simplify and make it very clear, especially in terms of how Buddhism shows up in our current culture. So having said that, we'll do a little bit from the text directly, where he gives an overview of why we're looking into this aspect as we engage in this Buddhist path. And then I'll more simplify and clarify some of the lineages, and then we'll get to a little bit of the life of the Buddha himself. So let's go ahead and pop up the text. The spread of Buddha Dharma and Buddhist canons. So here we'll go directly from the text because I think they give a very good explanation of why it's important to know this. Not all people think alike. They have different needs, interests, and dispositions in almost every area of their lives, including religion. Right? We can clearly get that, right? Our neighbors don't necessarily think like us. In this light, the Buddha is a skillful teacher, gave multiple teachings to correspond to a variety of sentient beings, right, of conscious beings. As the Buddha Dharma spread across the Indian subcontinent and into other lands, people had access to different sutras and found certain teachings more suitable to their minds than teachings in other sutras. So this is, I think, really key, and we'll just pause there. As the Buddha Dharma spread, there's a wide range of teachings, and the Buddha did not always teach how to become enlightened. He taught Somebody was asking about marital problems or issues there. He gave some advice there. A wide range of teachings to people in different parts of the country in different situations. Ultimately, it was always around a very common theme, though: how to remove suffering. And ultimately, that is the Buddhist teaching. How do we remove suffering? What are the true causes of suffering? What are the true causes of lasting happiness and well-being? And so that's going to take many forms and taught to different people, depending on where they're at in their lives, met people where they're at. So these teachings have taken on life in different people's lives in different ways that are meaningful for them. So really valuable to understand. And that all of us, we have a different experience even watching this teaching, and we have a different set of conditioning and upbringing and views on the world and views on ourselves. And so even this teaching, all of you are going to have a little bit different take on and find some of it more meaningful than others. So that's really important. There's not a dogma in Buddhism that this is the way, it needs to be. And there's this authority in that sense. Even the Buddha said, take our teachings and test them, check them, see if they are accurate for you. Okay, back to the text. So since he taught in these different ways to different people, multiple Buddhist traditions came about. The development of these traditions and their presentation of the teachings were also influenced by economic and political situations in each land, as well as the climate, social structure, language, and the culture of each place. So there's a lot here, right? So as Buddhism spreads, you're going to see a very different flavor in different countries. In Japan, for example, different than in India or Sri Lanka, Vietnam, China. These places, Buddhism can look very different because it is now being incorporated into that culture. And, there's putting here economic influences, political situations, climate, social structure. All of this is going to have an impact. Language is going to have a huge impact. A lot of people don't are even aware that certain languages don't even have a word that another language has. So you can't translate it, purely. And so that's one of the big struggles, I think, with capturing the essence of some of the Buddhist teachings as it makes its way into different languages. In English, there are not some words that were in Tibetan, and in Tibetan there were some words that are in English. And how do you capture the flavor of things, let alone coming from Sanskrit to Tibetan or Sanskrit to English? So we're going to have some different takes on Buddhism. And then economically, and culturally, politically, one of the things that he talked about is climate. So, for example, in China, if you're a Buddhist, mostly it's Pure Land Buddhist, they're really strictly vegetarian, and no problem being vegetarian there. In Tibet, at a much higher elevation with less access and opportunity to be vegetarian, you're going to find that they'll eat some meat. Culturally, in the teachings and practices in Southeast Asia, the monks go around with a little alms bowl, and whatever food's put in there, they eat it all as though, with equanimity and gratitude. Doesn't matter whether it's meat or vegetarian. And so amongst them all, though, they do seek not to kill or to have animals of any sort killed for them to eat specifically. So you're going to find even that looks very different, again, just due to climate, culture, then politics are going to get involved, obviously, and economic structures, social structures. And so Buddhism will be shaped in those countries with these cultural overlays. And it's important to, His Holiness is going to talk about that. So let me get back to the text there. So even though, as this evolved and it found its way into these different cultures, all of the Buddhist teachings share the four truths, right? The Four Noble Truths. Their selection of texts, imagery, rituals, textual interpretations, points of emphasis, and religious instructions are all going to be influenced by the society in which they're produced. Baseline, though, is the Four Noble Truths. And that's really valuable to just bear in mind. The first teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, that is the baseline of the Buddhist path, the Buddhist teachings, and then everything else in different lineages are ways to engage with those Four Noble Truths. They point out here texts, imagery, rituals, explanations, points of emphasis, all these things were refined within these different cultures to be able to engage with these Four Noble Truths and the truth of the path of liberation, the Noble Eightfold Path. So knowing the history of Buddha Dharma is important, right? So that we can avoid absorbing sectarian biases that have been passed down for centuries. So Buddhism is not immune from this, right? This is the right way, that's the wrong way. We get a lot of sectarian bias, and this is again getting towards dogma, whereas understanding that these practices work for this group of people in a very effective way. Another group of people, different way, can need some different points of emphasis and different types of practices. So the idea here is that this can help us, as it states here, to understand why Buddhism developed in different places and why certain practices were more beneficial to different types of people. And this can, in turn, stimulate us to discern the actual Buddha Dharma from the cultural overlays so that we can practice the true Dharma without confusing it with the cultural tradition. Sorry, a little tongue-tied. So that we can practice it without confusing it with cultural traditions. Now, it's a nice thought, but it's not so easy, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, which is much more my area of training, is that so much of the Tibetan culture is infused with the Buddha Dharma that it's very difficult to, remove just the cultural overlay and get to the essence of teachings. It's so easy to then throw out the actual Buddha Dharma if you're trying to remove just some of the cultural overlay. So really tricky business there. Some of it's more doable than others. And also in other cultures, same way I imagine. I'm just more familiar with the Tibetan. So the idea is to not get too caught up in the cultural things as though that is the ultimate Buddha Dharma. One example of this for that I'm thinking of that's coming to mind is water bowl offerings, right? So I have water bowl offerings on my altar. You'll notice at the center we have water bowl offerings. And in Tibetan culture, you're going to see water bowl offerings all the time. You're going to be seeing monks, nuns, lay people, everyone, making these offerings daily. There are teachings on how to make water bowl offerings, the mind to have when you do them, the way the water gets offered, the way you take down the water bowl offerings. The Buddha did not walk around India with water bowl offerings. Okay, so that was not part of his practice. So you go, okay, well, there's a Tibetan overlay there. But on the other hand, there's also a skillful ritual. That's why I make water bowl offerings. Is I'm cultivating the environment. I'm cultivating the place I'm going to sit, I'm bringing the Buddhist to mind. I am visualizing as I'm making these offerings. I'm cultivating some generosity. I'm cultivating a reverence and merit as I do this. And in preparing the environment and then being ready to sit down and do my practice, my mind's in a very different place than if I just sat down and brought the Buddha to mind. I've taken some time to clean the environment, to bring the Buddhas to mind, to have these precious offerings, to think about benefiting all other beings. And so now we have this very skillful ritual that can help really transform the mind even before you begin a practice. Sure, it's a Tibetan cultural overlay, but it's also a valuable, for me, practice that really helps me transform my mind and prepare me to engage in practice at a greater level than I would when I don't do it, and I do notice the difference. So can I practice without water bowl off? Sure. As a matter of fact, I'm in a hotel room in Colorado Springs. I do not have my water bowls with me, and I can do my practice. I do my practice. So, but then other people get caught. You need to do this. If you don't do it right, there's all this negative karma. And now we got the cultural overlay. So really having a good context about understanding certain rituals that can be very beneficial, some that are not. For you maybe, and but understanding their essence and why we do them. So a lot of these practices, though have a cultural influence, they were developed specifically to engage with your practice, to engage with these Four Noble Truths. And so they can be incredibly valuable. So, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as we'd say. It's important to know the difference, to understand it, but to also understand its purpose and how that relates to the pure teachings and the essence of the Dharma. Okay, let's take a look at the text again here. So yes, it's as William said, we try not to confuse the two, but that's easier said than done. Now, learning about the history of Buddhism helps us to see Buddhism as a living tradition that influences various societies and is influenced by them. Okay, this is, I think, really critical that this is not a stagnant thing. Our culture is changing, everything's changing. The world we live in today is not obviously the same world when the Buddha walked the earth. And this teaching of the Buddha Dharma is something that is in flow, right? Even the teaching of Buddha is talking about dependently arising events, the continuum of consciousness, the ongoing experience, and how things change. Everything's impermanent. So it is a living tradition. And the Buddha Dharma is going to speak to us here in the United States in a very different way than in Tibet, in a very different way than China. And so it's going to come, it's going to evolve, it's going to be influencing us, we're going to be influencing it. And there's also some danger there, right? Because again, a lot of people want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we have a lot of American sort of ideas about Buddhism that quite frankly throw out some pretty fundamental things. And so being really careful to hold these essence of these teachings in ways that are meaningful for us without watering them down to where they're not very effective. So there's some great little teaching. Alexander Berzin talks about Dharma light, Dharma light, kind of like Coca-Cola light, that a lot of things that get presented in this modern culture in the US sometimes are just taking the things that are really putting a Band-Aid on our suffering instead of actually getting to the depth and the core of it. So valuable to understand the difference and to not really shy away from the really richness and the depth of these teachings too easily. We want to make sure that they're still here as we let this culture live on in ways that are meaningful for the current culture that we're living in. So we tread lightly there, but it will, Buddhism needs to be embraced in our life in the way that we live our lives, in the cultures that we live in. And we have a different culture even in Colorado than in Alabama or New York. And but the essence of these teachings will apply everywhere. The human mind still has the same traps, still has the same confusion. Some of the skillful methods and means may look a little different now, but we don't want to throw out the actual methods that eradicate these underlying afflictive states of mind. All right. Another good point is being made here is that this living tradition, it's influenced us, and we influence it. But if we're aware of this, we can come to differentiate the three jewels that are perfect objects of refuge. So the three jewels that are perfect objects of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, these are beyond samsara, beyond conditioned existence. They are really the refuge we take in. That's these teachings on awakening. The Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Buddha gave the teachings, the Dharma that are the teachings, the Sangha, the realized beings who have engaged in this path and have liberated themselves. So we can take refuge in these objects in the sense of, and by the way, Dharma is not simply just the words on a page. So it's the realization of who we are, the nature of reality, the truth, basically. If we can't rely upon the truth, I'm not sure what we can rely upon. And so the Buddha who pointed the way of the truth, the Dharma is the truth, the people that came before that realized these in their own lives. All of this, these are reliable, they're beyond samsara, they're beyond a conditioned existence. And again, we may not be there to take a refuge in that. We might not have that kind of faith yet. So we don't make that up. We don't sit there and go, this is what I believe. It's really establishing a faith based upon exploration, based upon reasoning, based upon practice, and exploring and saying, is this the way of truth? Is this the way of liberation? Is this the way of freedom? So we'll engage in these teachings in that way to explore that. And maybe at some point you might go, oh yeah, this is something I can rely upon. But again, we don't just, okay, well, it's here in the book. But within Buddhism, it's very clear that the things that we take refuge in cannot be contaminated by a conditioned existence, can't be caught up in samsara. Otherwise, they're always going to be a little tainted. And, we can see that even with some teachers that might be very good teachers, including myself, that, not quite there yet. So not everything I'm going to do or say is going to be something that's reliable. But an awakened Buddha would be beyond that. All right. So the point he's making is that we can differentiate between these perfect objects of refuge from the religious institutions established by limited human beings. Okay, so I think we're all pretty aware of this, right? Religious institutions can, as we know, be detrimental even, can be corrupt, can be very helpful, wide range. And we want to understand this, right? And be able to be real thorough about the institutions that we engage with in terms of our religious and spiritual paths, and whether they are more or less contaminated. That might be a good way of putting it. Yeah, because we're just not perfect. And some are actually quite corrupt. Some are actually incredibly ethical and helpful. And a lot are in between somewhere. And a lot of people who have a good heart and feel that they have something to share and are coming from a good motivation might not have much clarity. And I was approached, just here at this, I'm at this symposium, someone who, good heart, just bright, loving heart, and has their book, comes up to me after my presentation, and wants to make sure I get this book, and that this is what's going to help people, and this is the way we're going to do things, and I have no doubt that's coming from a pure place and out there. And then I'll notice as I go down to other places and booths and different people, that book is everywhere. And so what a wonderful motivation to feel that something has helped you and you would like to share that with others. And then you're going to be the teacher to do that. I don't know. I haven't read the book yet. Don't know, what its insights are. But, this person may have great insight, may not have much insight at all, may just want to, be a teacher, or maybe has something that is just really meaningful. So you can have a pure motivation, but maybe not very much real actual experience or realization. And, or might have a really good motivation to have a lot to share. My take is, that there are many people who want to be teachers with a really good intention and motivation that might be engaged without having a great deal of personal experience. I mean, I don't feel I have much experience, and I think I got about 20 years, but I think I know about this much. So pretty sure I know about this much. I think I'm pretty clear. And so for me, it's always trying to stay within my own bandwidth and not to go beyond my scope, and just do my best with a good motivation. But I'm I'm far from anything like a realized being. And so it's just important to check out these institutions, and some of them, like I say, are incredible and wonderful. I think of good examples, obviously, Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo that we bring to mind a lot, and the Venerable Tuden Children, who's helped write these texts that we're reading, and Sravasti Abbey, really wonderful, ethical, amazing place for monastics and for teachings for lay people. And so as we engage with teachings and teachers and things, we want to also understand that they also, in human limited conditioning, can be fraught with some struggles as well, and maybe not always a good motivation, and don't want to get caught up in sectarianism or dogma. But the Dharma, that now, even you'll find some pure Dharma even in some pretty, let's say, contaminated, sort of misguided institutions. You might still find it there. So while the Dharma jewel goes beyond space and time, the Buddhist institutions are not refuge objects, although they do their best to serve the Dharma. All Buddhist traditions have their own accounts of Buddhism's history, the place of their own tradition within that, and the authenticity of their own and others' scriptures. These are generally based on oral tradition that was written down in later centuries. It was really passed on orally for centuries. Modern academics employing tools and methods of historical research that are not used in traditional presentations of Buddhist history also have their views. While traditional accounts do not change with time, the views of academics change as new discoveries are made. So as you're getting the history from different lineages, they're going to just share the history that has been traditionally taught. But as pointed out here, there's a great deal of research. We have some different technology that try to pin down what happened when, and sometimes some pretty new information. Sometimes just confirming the stuff that we know. It's pretty amazing when they find ancient texts in faraway lands that are the exact wording, like in the Gobi Desert from in Tibet or even in India. And it was all orally transmitted, and it winds up being exactly the same words. Speaking of the various traditions, the Buddhist traditions and teachings, or speaking of them, can only be done in a general way. People don't fit into neat categories with well-defined borders. And so here, the text goes into a very, gets a little more detail in terms of lineages and the Pali Canon and Sanskrit language. I think it'll be a little more valuable for me to share with you the basic lineages. I think he actually has a nice little breakdown here. Let me see. So after going in and describing them, talks about these vehicles and paths. And then there's a little guide. Yeah, I'll bring that up. So first, the discussion is around the different languages. So essentially, the Buddha taught in a language that was not written down. What later was written down, the earliest language that we have written Buddhist texts is the Pali Canon. So that's the oldest text that is available, and it is mostly the text that is used by the Theravadan tradition. So in here, I'm going to pop up the little chart that is in the text. If I can move my finger to the right button, there we go. So they broke it down first in the two different languages, Pali tradition, Shravaka vehicle, solitary realizer, and Bodhisattva path. So it's just saying that in the Pali tradition, in the Pali text, you're going to have these three vehicles, these three pathways. And the three vehicles are determined based on the motivation. Right? Shravaka and solitary realizer are the paths of an arhat, the path of liberation. Bodhisattva vehicle is, often called the Mahayana Buddhist path, the great vehicle or universal vehicle, is actually not simply liberation, but to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. Different motivations. So Shravaka vehicle, solitary realizer, these days often are, of the same, just arhat path in the sense of they're together in that motivation and so forth. In the Sanskrit tradition, and so you're going to find most of the teachings of all Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle, Bodhisattva path, or universal vehicle, will be, coming from a Sanskrit teachings. And again, in the Sanskrit teachings, you're going to have both the Shravaka, the solitary realizer, Bodhisattva, but then you're also going to have some additional, more in-depth Mahayana or Bodhisattva vehicle paths like Tantrayana or Vajrayana. So Vajrayana, Tantrayana, that's the tantric vehicle. That's Tibetan Buddhism is you're going to find that there. So let's make it simpler and and hopefully a bit more relevant for just the world we're living in these days. Essentially, we have two, big sort of branches of Buddhism. One is the the Theravada Buddhism, which would be like the Shravaka path. So it's in the Pali Canon. It is in the teachings that you'll see in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Vietnam. So Southeast Asia, you're going to see very traditional Theravadan. You have Thai forest monks. They are utilizing the Pali Canon, and they are engaged in a path of arhat, the path of liberation that the Buddha taught. And within that, of course, there's always some overlap. But in general, you have Theravadan Buddhists, which will follow Pali Canon and be on the path of an arhat, a liberated being, realizing their nature of their own self and being free of samsara. Then you have the Mahayana path, which mostly then will be from the Sanskrit languages, and the Bodhisattva path will be found in Mahayana Buddhism or Bodhisattva path. You'll find like in Japan, Zen Buddhism would be a Bodhisattva path. In China, so you're seeing northern, so you have sort of southern, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and sort of India. It's going to be much more in general Theravada and Pali Canon. Northern Tibet, China, and Japan, you're going to find much more of the influence of the Bodhisattva path coming from the Sanskrit languages in those teachings. So within the Bodhisattva path, you're going to have Zen Buddhism. Japan, you're going to have Pure Land Buddhism in China. And then in Tibet, you're going to have this additional feature of the Bodhisattva path, which is the Vajrayana path or Tantric Buddhism. And so the rituals there within those teachings of transformation, that's, pretty unique to Tibet. All of them based on the Four Noble Truths. And then these different methods and lineages have arisen for the cultures and the minds, of the people within those cultures in methods and rituals, practices and teachings and emphasis that are more suited for them. So Japan, very different culture than Vietnam or Sri Lanka. And it'll look very different. You go to a Zen Buddhist temple, and it's going to be, it's going to be really elegant. It's going to be sparse. It's going to be beautiful. You go to a Tibetan, the background I hear, you just see the tanka, and you're going to see imagery. You're going to see colors. You're going to see this very vibrant presentation of Buddhas. So very different between Japan and Tibet. So these are going to be skillful methods for the Dharma to ripen in the minds of those people. So here in the United States, where I'm teaching from, different people are drawn to Zen Buddhism or Pure Land or Theravada or the Tibetan. I remember the first time I went to the Tibetan temple, and the altars, the statues, the thing. It was a bit overwhelming for me. And, I was kind of like, wow. And so, but it really ultimately did speak to me, and I understood the ripening of that within my mind, and worked for me. But other lineages, other teachings, other practices are more suited for other people. Boy, time is flying here. I can get to a little more. Let's get back to that text and pop it up. So that's these different traditions and how they've arisen was over time. I think the one of the big explanations that I have found really helpful in my own quest for understanding the evolution of these teachings is a you actually can find on YouTube. It's a teaching by Bhikkhu Bodhi, so a Theravadan scholar, monk. He's translated just these texts, Pali canons, and just an example, and an incredible scholar. He gave teaching, so Bhikkhu Bodhi, Theravadan tradition, on the bridging the two vehicles. So the Theravadan vehicle and the Mahayana vehicle, the Bodhisattva path. And in his explanation, the way he saw it was that when the Buddha said, when he gave his teachings, it was the teachings of liberation. Do this and you'll be liberated. And that's the path of arhat, an arhat. And so that's what it did, practice like thus, and you'll be liberated from samsara. And that's what people did for a long time. And then as people refined these practices, as they engaged in the teachings, his explanation was, and there are teachings about bodhisattva path in there, but they're not very emphasized. They started asking, well, he taught how to be liberated. What about how to be a Buddha? And then it was in that vein that people started diving more into the bodhisattva path, which is actually not just how to be liberated, but how does one become a fully awakened Buddha? And so if you would like to explore that a little bit further, I would encourage you to look up that YouTube video. Maybe I'll post it in our community. And so you can find it there. And he'll go into much greater detail with a lot more knowledge and understanding and wisdom than I can. So, really wonderful, I think, thoughtful process about how this may have evolved. Now, I say we're nearing our time, and we're just about to get into the life of the Buddha. So I think probably it would be wise to pause there, and we'll pick it up. I'm going to just double check here on my screen. The Buddha's life. Yeah. So we will pick up there next week. And I'll invite you to have a little time to discuss with each other. I think a valuable thing to talk about is our own motivations, our own value in finding Buddhist teachings in our own lives that can help us reduce suffering. We talked here about these motivations of becoming an arhat, liberated from samsara. We talked about becoming a Buddha, fully awakened being for the benefit of all others. That would be a bodhisattva path. And within our Tibetan traditional teachings, we talk about three types of motivation. One is to, have a good next life, that we're not going to, ruin this incredible opportunity as we transition to a new life. And which kind of works with sort of a Christian mind, right? Go to heaven or, have a good next life. We might have the motivation to be free of samsara, to be liberated, right? To be like an arhat. We might have the motivation to become a fully awakened Buddha and remain and help all other beings find their way out of samsara. Those are these typical three motivations. And then the fourth one that I bring up quite frequently, and I think where a lot of people are, and it's valuable, is to not suffer so much in life you currently live in, and that's a valid motivation to engage in this path that maybe I don't know about, rebirth or Buddhahood or arhat, but I can be very highly motivated to eliminate mental afflictions in my own life, to eliminate mental emotional suffering, struggles, worry, stress, to live life more fully, with more freedom, more accurately, to be a good parent, brother, son, sister, to have a meaningful life. And I believe that that is a valid motivation to engage in this path. And I think most people, if we're coming in with that motivation, yeah, we may find that evolves as we explore, that we might, Buddhist path for the next motivation might appear, might not. But in the meantime, what we're doing is cutting through the obscurations that prevent us from living the current life that we have fully. But to do so without watering down these teachings. And I think that's critical. I think you can engage in these teachings authentically in the way that the Buddha presented, in the sense of testing them, trying them out, finding true causes of suffering and true causes of lasting happiness in your own life, and see if it's true or not. Ultimately, Dharma is about truth, and then these other aspects of the path and different practices you'll find might be more beneficial or less beneficial. And so I think that is where the majority of human beings in our modern culture may come into the Buddhist path, and recognize there's no dogma in Buddhism. If there was, now you're not practicing Buddhism, because his very words were, test this. Don't take it on my authority. Okay. Well, wow, that time went. So I am so grateful that no matter where I am, whether I'm probably while you all are in this teaching, I'll probably still be somewhere coming through the mountains, maybe. Hopefully, if the passes stay open, and finding my way home, that we can still have these precious teachings available to us. And hopefully you'll have a precious discussion with each other a little bit. And I would also like to, before we end, invite us to dedicate the merit that we've already cultivated from our time together. So let me pull that up here. Yes. Yeah, how amazing. What a gift it is to be able to be in different parts of the world and be able to be with each other, to support each other in living lives that are meaningful and cultivate our highest qualities. Wow, pretty wonderful. Okay, taking just a moment to recognize the value of the support that we have provided for each other, and our motivation to engage in these teachings in ways that are beneficial for ourselves and all others. Let us dedicate the merit that we have cultivated from our time together. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Well, thank you all so much for all the good that you bring to the world. Please be well, take good care of yourselves, and please take good care of those around you. I'll go ahead and post that video right after I sign off here.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha.